Archbishop Fitzgerald was born in England, so we are two Europeans here in your company, in 1937, and he joined the Missionaries of Africa, which is a religious order in the Roman Catholic Church. He studied in Tunisia between 1957 and 1961. When he went to Rome to study at the Gregorian University, he was also in Rome when the Second Vatican Council was held between 1962 and 1965, and we will celebrate together tomorrow at the Catholic University of America a conversation together with Muslim partners and Jewish partners in celebration of 50 years Nostra Aetate. Nostra Aetate is the document that the Second Vatican Council published about the relationship between the Catholic Church and other religions, and we will probably talk a bit more about it because, as I said, Bishop Fitzgerald was there at that time. Then he went to London to study at the School of Oriental and African Studies. He spent some time with his own love, I think I can say, in Africa, Uganda, Sudan, two countries with sizable Muslim populations as well. Then he went back again to Rome to study at BISAI, the Pontifical Institute for the Study of Arabic and Islam. And from his function at this Pontifical Institute, he also became involved in the work of the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue, and I think that's probably the function that is most directly related to the relations between Christians and Muslims. He became the General Secretary of that council in 1987 when Cardinal Arinze was its president, and then between 2002 and 2006 he was himself the president of the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue, and then he became a papal nuncio in Egypt, and also the representative to the League of the Arab Nations, Arab States, until 2012 when he became kind of, in the academia we would say, emeritus. So he went to Jerusalem where his congregation of the African missionaries has its house, and he just told me, I was there, but I have other things to do. So last year he was a professor at John Carroll University, and by the way, one of his colleagues there is Dr. Sarita Brak, who happens to be the founder of Rumi Forum, and he is a professor there as well. So they did some things together, and that probably is also the best way to finish my introduction by telling you a very short story. 3 weeks ago, the business manager of my institution, I work at the School of Theology and Religious Studies of the Catholic University of America, she happens to be Jewish, and she saw me early that morning, and she said, I just heard a program on the national radio that was talking about a bishop who is teaching the Quran. Now, tell me, can a bishop teach the Quran? And I didn't know who she was talking about. So I kind of carefully answered, well, it depends on which bishop talks about the Quran. And then she said, okay, I'll forward you the article that I just read about it. And it turned out to be about Archbishop Fitzgerald. And then, of course, I told her, well, if there's one bishop who can do it, it's Archbishop Fitzgerald. So with this small introduction, I want to get our conversation started. Maybe you can start, Archbishop, by telling a bit about the Missionaries of Africa, because you are a member of that religious congregation, and I get it's not so very well known. So could you tell a bit more about what that is?
Well, thank you. First, I'd like to say that I'm very happy to be at this Rumi Forum, which Dr. Zeki Seritaprak was actually the founder, and we've been working together in John Carroll University. So we're officially known as Missionaries of Africa, Society of Missionaries of Africa. We were founded in 1868 in Algeria. by the Catholic Bishop of Algiers, or the Archbishop of Algiers, Cardinal Lavigerie, a Frenchman, who had been invited to become, by the General MacMahon, he'd been invited to take this position in the Catholic Church, and when he arrived there, he sort of said, people, I'm the bishop not only of the Catholics, I'm bishop of all the people here as well. And coinciding with his arrival, there was something wrong.
Excuse me, just take this.
Oh. So, there was an outbreak of cholera, and many people died, and there were many orphans left, and he said, we must do something about this. And his priests that he had in Algiers were not really concerned with the Muslims. They were looking after the French Catholics, and they weren't. So he decided to found an institute of missionaries, and the first work was with Muslims then in Algeria. But Lavigerie had a broader vision. He was not just for Algeria, he had the whole of Africa in mind, and he sent us into the center of Africa. Christian missionaries had remained on the coast of Africa mainly and had not penetrated into the interior, and he said, this is not right, we should be going right into the center. It was the time of Livingstone, Stanley, and he was reading about the accounts of these missionaries and explorers, and he said, we as the Catholic Church, we should be there as well. So he sent us into both West Africa and in East Africa. I mention that because Christian-Muslim relations has always been a part of the work of our society, but it hasn't been the main work of the society. More people have been sent into other countries of Africa. We're working in about 22 countries of Africa, and so much so that in my youth, I joined when I was young, but in my youth I never heard anything about Muslims, about North Africa. It was only later that I learnt about this, and I had the good fortune to be sent, as you said, to Tunisia to study theology there. In a Muslim country, and Arabic was introduced into the program. We had a couple of hours of Arabic language every Monday afternoon. And every Monday we had couscous for lunch. So if you can imagine the poor man who had to come and teach us Arabic, battling with our digestion. Anyway, we did learn something. And it proved useful for me afterwards when I was asked, after having studied theology, I was asked to teach Arabic. And so that's where I went to London to study. So our missionary society, and we also have sisters who are separate but with the same spirit as ourselves, founded by the same Cardinal Lavigerie, who work. It's very much a work of, I would say, inculturation. Our founder insisted on our learning the language of the people amongst whom we're working, serving. So much so that with all his authority as an archbishop, he said, if you don't speak the language, you have to speak, after 6 months, you have to, in community, together, you have to speak the language of the people who are around you, under the pain of mortal sin. Well, I think he overstepped his powers there, and many people committed mortal sins, including myself, because we didn't always speak the language of the people. But we do have that tradition and we set up language schools in different countries also, and I think that it's symbolic, if you like, but to relate to people, he didn't want us to make French of the Christians that we, Christian communities that we founded. No, you have to adapt the gospel message to their culture. And that was it.
And of course, language is often seen as kind of the key to a culture. So
Well, it is, yes. Yeah.
Could you tell a bit more about, let's say, the combination of, on the one hand, his interest for Africa, and on the other hand, his interest for Islam? Because I think Islam in Africa is different from Islam that we hear mostly talking about.
Well, one of the results of our society's work was that they decided that people, to work among Muslims, you have to know, you have to study Arabic and Islam. And so an institute was founded in Tunisia. There is an institute that still exists in Tunisia, Institut de Belles Lettres Arabe, which is a cultural center. Has a wonderful library which is open to students from Zaytuna and other universities, and lecturers also, and has a cultural journal which is now run by Tunisians. So lifting up the culture of Tunisia to make it known to other countries, in particular to the Western world. That in 1964, that institute had to move from Tunisia and eventually ended up in Rome. But the staff members all had an experience of Islam in North Africa. And coming to Rome meant that this institute should be at the service of the whole Catholic Church, and not only of the North African countries, but of Africa, which was our concern, but also Asia and Europe and America and Australia. So that's why when I started working there, I was given the chance almost straight away to go to Uganda. A post was offered me at the University of Makerere in Kampala, the capital of Uganda, and I was allowed to accept that because it would give me an idea of how Islam is practiced in that area. Yeah. And I must say that was a very fruitful experience for me. I'd like to say this for Zeki also, because there was already a Muslim lecturer in the Department of Religious Studies, and I arrived there and I said, what do you want me to teach? And he said, well, what do you want to teach? What would you like to teach? And I had expected him to say, well, you can do a bit of history. Anything that is strictly religious, I will reserve that to myself. Not at all. It's completely open. And I took that as a sign of confidence, you know, and it really did help. And I say that because Zeki was the same. I was asked to give a course at John Carroll University in Cleveland, and I said, well, what should I teach? And he said, well, why don't you give a course on the Quran? So if your Jewish lady asks you again, well, say it was the Muslim who asked him to do it. But you know, that is a great encouragement. And I would say, would we Catholics, would we have the courage to ask a Muslim to teach Scripture, to teach the New Testament? I don't know. Huh? And here, so you know, that was a real encouragement. Yeah.
One of the things when I read through your autobiographical introduction to the book that you wrote together with Dr. John Morelli about interreligious dialogue, what struck me was kind of the alternation between experience-based work and study-based work that you've done all the time. So you went to London to study there, you went to Uganda, you went to Sudan, you went back to Rome to study. Is that part of your missionary life, or how would you describe that alternation?
Well, I was trained to be a teacher, I suppose, for theology. I thought I was going to be teaching in seminaries, and then I was asked to teach in this Institute of Arabic Studies. So I had to learn Arabic. So that was the focus. Uganda, I was teaching again, but it was also experience.
Yeah.
And let me go back to that. At the beginning, because the first year students, they had a general program. All the first year students in religious studies had to do something on Islam. So they were mainly Christians. But there were Muslims also. And then those who specialized in Islam, there were very few, but they were all Muslims. And at the beginning I said to myself, how can I teach Islam to Muslims? So when we met the students, I said to them, I'm not here to teach you. I'm here to help you to study. So you have to learn. And you don't have to accept what I say. But if you don't agree with me and you want to contest what I'm saying, then you have to have good, solid arguments. It's not enough to say, oh, my grandfather says it's not like that. No, you have to have good, solid arguments too. And so on that basis, we got on pretty well. Yeah. So then, after working in Rome, which was teaching, didn't have much contact with Muslim communities in Rome, we would invite Muslim lecturers to come and stay with us and give courses, but there was no Muslim permanently on the staff at that time. And then it was after that, after having been involved in that institute for 10 years, it was good to go into the field. For one thing, I had been the director of an Institute of Arabic Studies, but I'd never spoken Arabic, which is a bit embarrassing, really. So I suggested that I should be sent to a country where I would have to use Arabic. And I was sent to Sudan at that time. Northern Sudan, but we were in a parish looking after southern Sudanese. It was difficult. It was difficult because there was, I would say, a tension. Our Christians, who were mainly southern Sudanese, who'd come up to the north looking for work, they were young men who had never been to school because of the war in Sudan. The schools were not open, but they spoke Arabic of a sort. They all had their own languages, but the common language was Arabic. And so the common language in our parish was, we did all the work in Arabic. But we, as missionaries of Africa, there was a community of us there, we felt that we should be in contact with the Muslim population too. Christians didn't like that. They didn't like that. And some of our colleagues, the Muslim colleagues, also said, but why are you wasting your time with these Christians? Well, of course, that encouraged us even more to be dedicated to the Christians. But you know, there was that tension of we cannot be the church. It's the nature. It's theological. It's the nature of the church is not to be a club for your own people. It is to be a sign to the whole world, and so we must be related to other people. And I could understand the Sudanese Christians who wanted the church to be a club. And in some ways, I would say in the Middle East, the churches are clubs for their people, you know, and this impedes in a way the good natural relations with the majority of the population. So we were trying to give an example, and we tried. we're still there.
Yeah.
Not in that place. We're in Khartoum.
Isn't that, just to jump a little bit to the present day, isn't that a sound that you, I guess, often hear from Christians also in Egypt, where you were for a long time? Why bother with Muslims? Isn't it naive to believe in dialogue with Muslims? Isn't that a question that you get often?
Well, not a question, it's a reflection. But an example, if we had visitors when I was in Egypt, well, I would like to take them to the pyramids, obviously, but also to Al-Azhar Mosque, and look at the mosque. And a Christian driver, would take us there and park, diplomatic immunity, so we could park just near the mosque where it's not normally you can park, and we would go in and visit the mosque. He would never go in. He's born in Egypt, brought up in Egypt, but has never been inside a mosque, and has no intention of going, no intention of trying to get to know the other people. We know them. But they don't know them. Yeah. They don't know the riches of the Islamic tradition. They don't. And you know, the contrary is true. The Muslims say, yes, we know Christianity because we know it from the Quran. But, well, that's not exactly, Christianity as it is lived by Christians.
We know who the Nasara are. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, to jump again, there is something that I find very good, very positive that has happened recently, and this is through Al-Azhar, through the Sheikh Al-Azhar, Muhammad al-Tayyib, who has started bringing together priests and imams in Egypt, and in order to help them to work together to oppose this sectarian violence which is there and which flares up from time to time. And that, to me, is an extremely positive thing, that to sort of create a friendship between the religious leaders, not just at the top, but also at a lower level. And that is happening. And that there was really rejoicing for that for me.
One of the things that I notice in conversation that I often have with people about dialogue is that they say, well, it's just talking.
Yes.
But what you just said about friendship, I think, also testifies to the fact, which I see in the dialogues that I am part of here also in the United States, is that when you have a long-standing relationship, you develop a friendship that is stronger than the boundaries that religions can sometimes create. Would you say...
Can I tell you a story there?
Please.
It's an American story. I was invited to Chicago for a meeting of ecumenical officers. So the ecumenical officers of the Catholic Church are not just ecumenical officers, that relations between Catholics and other Christians, but they also have this work of relating to people of other religions. So this was with John Borelli. It was a seminar on Islam. And they decided that we would go on the Friday, we would divide into different groups, and we were taken to different mosques. It had been arranged, it wasn't a surprise visit, and my group went to a mosque which had been founded by Bosnians in the outskirts of Chicago. But these Bosnian Muslims had recently, or not long before, hired a retired professor from Columbia University to be their manager. And this new manager happened to be Iranian, and he was Shiite. But he accepted the position of manager of a Sunni mosque in Chicago. And one of the first things that he decided to do when he took up his job was said, we must have an open day. What? An open day? The committee was extremely afraid. They thought he wanted to sell the premises. No, he said, no. He said, the people around us have the right to know who we are. That we want to invite them so that they come and see us, they meet us, and okay. So they had this open day, and one of the people who came was a local rabbi. And the rabbi looked around this rather fine institute. It was not just the mosque, the prayer room, but it had offices in various places. And he said to the manager, our synagogue has to be refurbished, and we don't know where to pray. Would it be possible for us to come to the Islamic Center and have our prayers? And the manager said yes. You know, so for 6 months while work was going on the synagogue, the Jewish community were coming to pray at the Islamic Center. And they formed friendship. Now, I discovered that because waiting for the Friday prayer, there was a notice board, and I looked at the notice board, and I saw Sunday, the 17th of May, let's say, joint picnic. Joint picnic with the Jewish community? What's this about? And so I asked the question, and you know, so this is where dialogue is more than just talking. This is meeting and coming together and doing things together. And that, I think, is extremely important. And that sort of, you know, it's a time when there's a strain between Jewish and Muslim relations. Here in this particular place, no, they're great friends.
Yeah. Final question before I want to open it up to the public. You've been involved in dialogue, of course, by doing it, but also by, let's say, presiding over the activities that the Roman Catholic Church officially organizes through the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue. Could you maybe try to tell us in a few sentences how you think that the Pontifical Council has tried to work on the new opening that this council document Nostra Aetate from 50 years ago gave to the relations with other religions, and more specifically with Islam?
Well, there have been different periods, and the first period, I would say, was a period of trying to persuade Catholics that this document was a good thing, particularly for relations with Muslims. It says at the beginning of the paragraph on Islam and Muslims that the Church esteems Muslims. Esteems Muslims? Oh, you know, they're our enemies. How can we esteem them? And so there was a whole task of overcoming the prejudices within the Christian communities. And they tried to do that by writing little booklets on guidelines for dialogue with Muslims, dialogue with Hindus, even traditional religions of Africa. And the missionaries were furious. We've been trying to stamp out these religions in Africa, and here you go and encouraging us to dialogue? No, well, yeah, the view has changed. The doctrine hasn't changed, but the way that we see things have changed. So there was a period, a sort of preparatory period, if you like. Then there was a period of many meetings that we had, international meetings, which don't achieve very much, but they are symbolic in many ways. Just before I started working in the council, John Paul II had the meeting in Assisi, inviting people of all different churches and Christian communities and religions to come to Assisi to pray for peace in the world. Now, just to see the Pope together with the Dalai Lama, together with the Archbishop of Canterbury, together with a Buddhist leader, another Buddhist leader, or a Hindu, you know, that is much more powerful than any document that you put out. It's symbolic and it works. And so Catholics could say, oh, the Pope's doing this, so maybe we can do it too. And then there was an emphasis on the local churches doing the same thing. Not everything can be done and has to be done by Rome, by the Vatican. It needs to be done at the local level. And so the encouragement given to have committees or commissions for relations with people of other religions. And, you know, with varying results. I would say that the office here in the United States has been very active and has helped to, for instance, the dialogues with Muslims, the different regional dialogues that Reiki has been involved in as well. You know, this has been very important. And it hasn't, yes, it's often looking at practical questions. We didn't discuss theological issues very much, but we did look at practical questions. One of our partners in Dialogue for the Council was the Islamic Call Society, so a missionary movement of Islam, but which had its headquarters in Libya, in Tripoli. And many years ago, we had a meeting with them on migration, because the Libyans were worried of the people from different countries of Africa coming to Libya on their way to other countries. What can we do? What can we do about this? And well, the only way you can respond to this is by encouraging the countries of origin, or encouraging the more fortunate countries to help those countries so that the people don't need to emigrate. But, you know, I mean, our little voices didn't carry very far.
The hasn't gone.
No. So I think our role was a role of facilitating the dialogue more than ourselves engaging in dialogue, and encouraging it by, for instance, we had with Iranians, we had a meeting on bioethics. Well, we invited somebody from the Academy of Life, of the family of Rome. So I always thought of that whenever we treated a theme, invite an expert to speak. Now, they may not know anything about Islam. That doesn't matter. It will be useful for them to see how, it'll be a training for them to see how other people react to the same problem that they are looking at. And so we would try to foster this spirit of understanding and collaboration, really. Not only ourselves, but also with other movements.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I promise this will be my last question. So, please, if you have questions for Archbishop Fitzgerald, don't hesitate. And please mention your own name and how you're interested in this in a few words, and then go forward with your question. Yes, please.
My name is Ilhan Kagri, and I'm from the Muslim Public Affairs Council. And I first want to congratulate you on your work. Thank you very much. A few years ago, there was a Turkish person who died here in the States, and one of the people attending the funeral was another Turkish person, a Jewish person. And as they were reciting the Quran, this Jewish man was also reciting the Quran. And I asked him, I said, how come you know the Quran? And he said, I'm almost a Hafiz. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, because when I was growing up, my house wasn't heated in Istanbul. And my mother would always tell the kids, go play in the mosque because the mosque is heated. So we spent all day long in the mosque. And, you know, and he had a good musical ear. So, you know, he was good in music anyway. So he ended up memorizing, you know, a vast majority of the Quran. So, you know, knowing that about Turkey, I just can't imagine Turkish Jews walking into mosques today. And I'm wondering, do you think that this kind of separation between the religions, you know, throughout the world has become more extreme in the last 50 years, let's say? And if so, what do you think could be the causes of that?
Well, I think of this double tendency. I think within our own Catholic schools, I think that there is now more attention paid to other religions than before. That doesn't, and also teaching about other religions, but sometimes experiential also, going and visiting. That didn't happen before, so that is something. But the separatism is there as well, you know, that communities that had lived quite peacefully together suddenly break into conflict, and so that becomes very complicated. But I think that there, of course, then, at least in the Western countries, more in Europe than here in the States, there is this secular drive, so that all religions are dismissed, and so there has to be, and there is a certain amount of cooperation now on the part of religions, people who are concerned with the survival of religion against this secularist domination in Europe, I think. So, and yet it can't be, you know, to use a bad word here, it can't be a crusade. And we don't want it to be a crusade, but we want it to be a movement where people of different religions can help one another and can support a religious understanding of humanity. I don't know.
Can I rephrase the question using what you yourself said? Do you also see that nowadays you have kind of this double movement? On the one hand, the desire to know about the religious others and the possibilities to know about religious others are becoming more and more, but on the other hand, the violence against religious others seems to grow as well. Do you see that?
Yes. Certainly in certain areas, I think that this violence has increased, and that, of course, provokes a negative reaction on the other side. So whole people are condemned because of violence, and so you don't want to have anything to do with them. And that has been our experience, you know. And when I started working in Christian-Muslim relations and went back to my hometown, to my home community of Christians, they say, "Why are you wasting your time in this?" They felt that it was waste, you know. That was their attitude. You know, convert them all, baptize them all. Here's water. No, that's not what we're there for. And it's true, every time there is an outbreak of violence, that sets back the dialogue, and you have to be ready to start again. Mm-hmm. And that part of it, I think, part of our
in that
conviction.
sense, interreligious dialogue is not very grateful work, because there is no linear progress.
But you know, you mentioned friendship yourself. Mm-hmm. You have friendships that grow, and that is very satisfactory. So it's not all negative.
No. Thank you to God. Alhamdulillah. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Zohib Nancy. I went to a Catholic high school and I'm Muslim, so interfaith dialogue has always been an interest of mine. You had mentioned that you spend a lot of time teaching and being a teacher, especially teaching Muslim students. What do you think is the most important lesson that you yourself learned from your Muslim students, and how do you think that shaped your approach later in fostering like dialogue and interfaith like community?
Well, the teaching of Muslim students as such was fairly limited. That was to the Ugandan experience. The Muslims that I came in contact with were the Ismailis, followers of the Aga Khan. I didn't know much about the Ismailis before I arrived there in Uganda, that community. They didn't know much about Sunni Islam. That was one of the ways that we were able to get on well together. So I actually learnt quite a lot from them, and I learnt something about that community, which is a particular community with a great solidarity of the community and outreach and a kind of way of living Islam in a modern way. And yet there's also a very strong spiritual depth in Ismaili. You know, to have people who are getting up early in the morning and spending an hour of meditation, well, makes you think. And priests were supposed to do that, or at least sometime in the day. And well, this encourages you to be faithful to that. I think if I broaden that, you know, what have I learned from relations with Muslims? I think it's also the importance of prayer and the lack of inhibition, if you like, of Muslims who will stop and you know, stop at the roadside and they will perform their prayer. And it's a bit sometimes difficult for Christians to pray in public. We don't do that. We're a bit inhibited, yes. Whereas, and I think also very much the community spirit also. Just a little example from liturgy, if you like. When Muslims go to pray in the mosque, the Muslim men, but I don't want to enter that problem. But you make lines, no? You make lines. Now, when I celebrate Mass in a church, I find a couple of Christians here and a couple here, most at the back, and nobody comes to the front. But aren't we supposed to be a community celebrating together? We can learn from the Muslims in that way, that we could learn from the Sikhs. I say to the Sikhs, we say, pray before you eat. I say the Sikhs teach us to eat before you pray. Do you understand that? Yeah. You know, the Sikh temple, they always prepare food. Any Sikh temple, they prepare food, and anyone can come and eat that food. When you go to eat, you'll be sitting on the floor, and you don't know, you can't ask, you don't know who is sitting on your right, who is sitting on your left, you don't know who is serving you, you don't know whether this person who is serving you is high caste or low caste. That doesn't matter. You are all equal before God. And that when you eat like that, then you can go and pray to God, because you've accepted this equality. You know, so in a way that's it's not the same, but it's a similar thing.
Thank you. Yeah.
My name is Tom Dine, and I'm fascinated by your account because it takes me back 53 years when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Mindanao and lived among Muslims.
Oh yes, yeah.
And I'm Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
But I used to hang out with the passionate priests who'd been kicked out of China. Mm-hmm. And they said the revolution's coming here because of the inequality and everything. It's still, it's still there. But as I was thinking about what you were saying, you ought to write a book on the principles of conflict resolution.
Oh.
And the first thing, again, I'm replaying 53 years ago in many, many ways. You've got to learn about the other. You've got to respect the other. You've got to get into the other's shoes. And you've got to learn the language. So those are the first principles that I learned. And it all came, and then dialogue and talking to one another and listening. Listen. So then 5 years ago, I had the opportunity, as my career was coming in foreign policy was coming to an end, to head a track 2 dialogue between Americans and Syrians. And here I am with a 6-pointed star, because I've been prominent in Jewish organizations and affairs. I've got a 6-pointed star on my forehead, and I'm leading the Americans, quote unquote, prominent Americans, former ambassadors, former congressmen, journalists, foreign policy analysts. And on the other side, a variety, and they weren't in conflict at the time with Bashar Assad. Now they knew his weaknesses and they knew what their own system was, but they weren't ready to overthrow it at all, as a matter of fact. And some had grown up with Bashar playing in the same sandbox as they told the stories. But in that particular circumstance, I followed all your principles. Again, listen. They've got something to say. A good smile can go a long way on both sides. And we used to, well, I formed a very close friendship with one of them, and we used to take walks in the back alleys of Damascus. Because he knew he was being followed, therefore they were following me, and et cetera. But finally, of the 8 Syrians, 3 fled during this current horrible, murderous period. And now I've had the opportunity to be invited to come to one of the Persian Gulf cities and study with them and write with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to write.
Good.
About
so you write the book, not me.
Well, I got to know what you wrote. Because I just want to tip my hat to you and say thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, thank you very much. Someone else?
Catherine.
Yeah, please.
Catherine Marshall from Georgetown University. You've referred and you've given a lot of insights into the missionary character. When we've done work all around the world, the issue of proselytizing comes up as a subject of a lot of tension. And the Christian and Muslim are the 2 proselytizing or evangelizing religions. Wondered what kind of insight you had on both the differences in perspective, but also where that stands now.
Well, it's true. Both Islam and Christianity feel that they have a message for the whole world, for the universe. It's for everyone. It's not just for ourselves. And it's a message to be given. The way is, how do you give this message? What do you do? I think Pope Francis would say, you know, the joy of the gospel. He's insisting on, yes, evangelization, but that means to show the joy of the gospel. It's to show the value of the gospel. It's not necessarily to persuade. It's to give by example. It's by it's not by indoctrination. I can tell you a story of, you know, what not to do. It always remained in my mind. It was a meeting on Christian-Muslim relations it took place in Austria in the 1970s, so a long time ago. And I was in a group which was chaired by an Anglican bishop, and our task was to give the theological underpinning for relations with Muslims. And we had some Christians in our group who said, the only thing that you have to say to Muslims is that Jesus is your savior, and you must accept Jesus as your savior. We said, well, no, not well. And our chairman said, well, you know, I don't really quite agree with that. Because if you start that way, you will never, you know, you break off relations immediately. You'll have opposition to you. So, and he said, well, you know, I like to go out into the garden with my friend Ali, and we look at the flowers, and we admire the flowers, and we give thanks to God, the Creator, for this wonderful creation, and we are in communion in that way. No, you have to speak about Jesus Christ. So we couldn't get anywhere. And so we were trying to write a report and say, some people say that you always have to speak about Jesus Christ. Other people say, no, It wouldn't accept. These people would not accept to agree to disagree. So our report was a blank sheet of paper. Yeah, there was nothing we could not report. And really, I think that was very salutary in a sense, that it showed people how deep is this problem. And if you understand evangelization in this proselytizing way, and they were telling people to go to the families and go knock on the door and give them a pamphlet about Jesus. Now you'll see what language they use at home by the dress of the woman who answers the door, and make sure that you have your booklet the right way up. Oh, come on now. I mean, how can do you think that is a real way of evangelizing? You have to establish relations, contact with people. You have to work with them. You have to understand them. Listen. And see the good in them too. That's so. And well, Muslims can perhaps do the same to us sometimes. They may be insisting on their Islam, and you should do this and you should do that, and maybe the Christians resist this. But if this da'wah, this invitation to Islam, is done in a courteous way, that is something else. So it's all in the manner, not in the matter.
Okay, well, and that reminds me not only of some of the documents that you probably, well, most certainly know much better than I about mission and dialogue,
Yes.
relation and dialogue, but also already in St. Francis when he gives this rule on how to go to the Muslim countries,
Yeah.
that he says, well, your first task is to be there
Yeah.
and to be submissive, even subtiti, I remember
Yes.
the term, which sounds like Muslims, like
Yeah.
Islam, really, to submit yourself. And in some situations, you can also proclaim, but only if you know that the opportunity is
Yeah.
there. That's
Yeah.
who wants? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Ken Bedell. I work in the U.S. Department of Education. So I'd like to ask a question about education. A great deal of, I'll make an observation and see if you agree with this, that a great deal of the education work of Christian churches, and in many cases, possibly Falun Gon's the lone example of this, Muslim education, has been towards the evangelistic approach. And wonder if you might comment on the role of education as we move forward in terms of the dialogue that you're proposing.
I suppose that my own missionary society founded schools in different places where we were working, and the idea would be to attract people, give something that they would attract them. But I don't think that the schools were used as an evangelizing tool in the sense. They were there to attract, but you didn't force Christianity down on the majority of the pupils would not be Christians. And I think that is, there are, for instance, the Catholic Church in Morocco has a whole network of schools. And they're Catholic schools. The teachers are Muslims, the pupils are Muslims, the managers are Muslims, but they still belong to the Catholic Church. And some years ago, the bishop said, why do we have these schools? We should get rid of these schools. They're a worry, they're a concern for us. And it was the government that said, no, you keep them. So they were not opposed to these Catholic schools in which there is an ethos. There is a respect. There is something that is there in these schools which maybe you don't find in the government school. The same in Indonesia. I remember we had a meeting with an Indonesian delegation, and this question of education came up as well. And But there were schools in Indonesia where all the pupils are Muslims, but they're still Catholic schools. And you're trying to educate, you know, why are we Christians? That it's to be fully human. So we're trying to make people into good human beings. And people from this organization, as you mentioned, would be able to say the same, I think. The Fethullah Gulen network of schools also. Yes, they are founded by Muslims, they're part of their missionary drive, but they're not necessarily converting all the pupils to be Muslims, as far as I know. And if you're not a Muslim, you're not going to be excluded. Or you know, if you're not a Christian, you're not going to be excluded from the school because you're not a Christian. Yeah.